The 80s had the General. The 90s had John Gilligan. In the noughties, it was the reign of Martin Marlowe Hyland. His was a familiar path with success and power, and then the recklessness. He had to go, because with him, an innocent young man doing an honest day's work died. Crime World presents Caught in the Crossfire, the unsolved murders of coke kingpin Marlowe Hyland and innocent Anthony Campbell. Available now on all podcast platforms. Pauline, I wanted to start by asking you a little bit about yourself. You're a Derry woman, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where did you grow up here?
I am the youngest of 10. 10 of us, 10 children. We grew up in Rosemount, in the city.
Yeah. And they were probably hard times then, were they?
Struggling. I remember my mum and father struggling quite a bit when we were all growing up because there wasn't much money around, and we struggled quite a bit.
There was a lot of troubles in Derry.
A lot of troubles at the time. Growing up, mum and father always anxious and worried about the other children getting involved in troubles.
Of course. I was up recently to do a tour of the Bloody Sunday. All around that area. It was very interesting. I hadn't actually been before, but
yeah. Well, my father and my oldest brother was on the Bloody Sunday original march,
right?
The Civil Rights March.
I'm sure they had stories to tell of that.
Yeah, and when God rest Jackie Duddy,
right?
When my mother got the word that a fella Duddy had been shot, she assumed it was either my father or my brother.
Right.
Unfortunately for, Jackie, God rest him's family.
And were they relatives?
No.
No, just...
No connection, no.
Yeah. I'm sure that was a terrible shock for...
Yeah, well, I don't really remember the original. I was only 2.
Yeah.
When the original Civil Rights March took place.
But you seem to have grown up... Everybody in Derry seems to have grown up with it. It's such an enormous thing here, isn't it?
It'll never be forgotten in the city.
Yeah.
Never. It was injustice for so many years. But the truth finally came out.
Mm-hmm. So what about yourself then? When did you leave home and start making your own family?
I had my first child at 18. I left home when I was 22. I had 2 children by that stage. I had my third child at 24. I didn't have Jasmine then. I was 31. She was just the wee princess of the family because there was that much a gap between her and my older children.
Mm-hmm.
So the older girls just adored her. I had 3 girls all together and 1 boy. The 2 older girls just adored Jasmine. My son sort of got a wee bit jealous because he was the baby for 8 years and then along came Jasmine,
right.
Pushed him off with the baby still. So, but I moved into my own place at 22. And then both my parents died when I was 27. I left Rosemount where I was reared and moved to Craigan. And I'm still in Craigan to this day.
And what sort of a child was Jasmine?
Very happy. Very bubbly. Just done her own wee thing. Loved the crack. Loved bullying the other her brother and her 2 sisters because she knew she'd get away with.
Mm-hmm.
Feisty. When she got 9, 10, 11, she became very, very feisty. She started St. Cecilia's. No, she did get a classroom assistant. She was finding things difficult in school.
Mm-hmm.
And they did give her, and St. Cecilia's, such a great school. They done more than they absolutely could for Jasmine. I have the highest respect.
Was that her secondary school as well? Yeah.
So she got her classroom assistant. Then she just fell away from school. She didn't want to go, and she was that tall. She was daubing school one day, and I was driving up a flyover, and she was taller than most girls her age. And all I seen was the big blonde head walking up a flyover. So I stopped the car and says, "Get in the car, you're going back to school."
Mm. And what age was she when she started struggling about staying in school?
I would say she was about 13.
Mm. And what was it that she found it difficult to read and write, was it? Or
no, it was just, she was just, Jasmine had dyspraxia.
Right.
Which was coordination balance disorder.
Mm.
And then when she was a child, she fell and broke her nose. And they wouldn't operate on her because they says unless it became a breathing difficulty, they would wait till she became an adult because, they would have to keep performing the operation as her fist grew.
Yeah.
So she got a lot of stick about her nose because it was kind of flat. Children are quite cruel.
Mm.
But Jasmine didn't like it.
And that sort of drew her away from school.
She just didn't want to be there. She didn't want to stick. All children's the same, and it's cruel. And bullying just should never be happening to any child.
So how did you handle that when you obviously wanted her to stay in school?
I wanted to. There was an argument every morning in my house. I mean, the vice principal, her year head, was coming down to my house to try and get her to go to school. And it was just, we were a bit more head off a wall because she just didn't want to be there. And I mean, she was intelligent. She had the brains. She just didn't want to be in school.
So that was a difficult time. That was the start of difficulties, was it?
Yeah. When she about 14, it was just sort of kiss bye-bye to school. It was... We were fighting a losing battle at that stage. And it was.
But her older sisters had moved out then, was it just
her older sisters and her brother had moved out. It was just me and Jasmine in the house then.
And what sort of things were you hoping for her? Were you looking at apprenticeships or?
She always wanted to work with children. She always wanted to, work with youth in a youth club or a youth centre.
Mm.
She started volunteering with extern when she was about 15. As I says, Jasmine was very tall for her age. And so she was going out with extern volunteering with the younger children. She loved that. And that's what her ambition was to work with children.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, she never got that far.
So what happens with Jasmine next, over the next few years?
When she was 16, she met a fella. He came from Belfast. He actually stayed in my home. I hate that man.
Mm.
I detest him. She got pregnant at 17. She went off everything. Now, in my knowledge, it was only grass she was smoking.
Mm.
But she went off everything. We were really looking forward to the birth of the little baby. So she gave birth and everything was great. And a few months later, she relapsed.
Mm.
She broke up with a child's father and she got herself clean again and went into Asha and Oma and came out. She done so well. She looked healthy again. She was back to being her old self. Her own personality had formed up again. Back to my daughter. Back to Jasmine. I was so happy. And then she just fell in way, don't know where they say, the wrong crowd, or
she started taking it again.
She relapsed again.
Yeah. So when she had started to take the drugs initially, did you have any idea what she was taking? You thought it was just smoking weed?
I didn't know for quite a while that Jasmine was taking anything, and then I actually one day I banged under. She left early in the morning. She was down. I banged under in the town, and the way she was speaking to me, you know, her voice was kind of slurred, and I looked, and I went, "Have you been drinking?" Because I was so naive about drugs. I didn't grow up. There was no drugs in this city when I was growing up. So I was really naive about drugs. And I went, "Have you taken it?" She went, "No." And I says, "Well, what's wrong then?" But ultimately, I had to find out about drugs then.
So you kind of copped yourself that it was obviously she was taking drugs.
And when I confronted her, it was grass.
Right. That's what she told you.
Yeah.
And when she got pregnant, then you noticed immediately the difference when she was...
Yeah. She started... I could see her eating more. Because I noticed that she hadn't been eating, you know, regularly, and the weight was dropping off her. But she started eating, her personality was coming back, she was looking healthy. She was really, really focused on the baby, her pregnancy and the baby. She took gestational diabetes, so she had to be aware of what she was eating at the time. Or she just couldn't wait to give birth. And then when she got delivered him, it was just the start of COVID lockdown.
Right.
And I wasn't allowed to hospital. And 2 days that she had to get an emergency section. And 2 days after she gave birth, they wheeled Jasmine out of her room, her ward, and wheeled the baby. He was in the neonatal unit because he was born premature. They wheeled him in the wee isolation part to him because Jasmine had a temperature. They were worried in case she had COVID. So for 24 hours, they had her in isolation in a room. And they were coming in with masks and...
Scary times. We kind of forget about that a little bit. It feels like it's so far in the past, but very frightening for anybody who had somebody in hospital.
And she was ringing me in video call and crying, and I couldn't get we weren't allowed to go into hospital. And she was only 18, and we just weren't allowed over, and it was heartbreaking, and she was terrified in case she had COVID, because we didn't know exactly what was going on with COVID, because it was just the start of it. And thank God it came back that she hadn't got it. But at the time, it was very, very worrying for her and everybody at home.
Of course. So when she got home then, how was she with the baby and minding him? And
she was fantastic. I mean, he was that small. He didn't get out for, I think it was 17 days, because he refused to take his wee bottle. So they were feeding him with tubes. And then when she got him home, like Jasmine was home, but I was driving her to the hospital 3 and 4 times a day. They go over for feeding times because she was trying to get him to take the bottles so she could get him home. And still nobody was allowed into the hospital, so it was just Jasmine and Jasmine only. So there was nights she stayed over in the neonatal of him, and thank God when the wee tit started taking the bottles, he never stopped, you know, a great wee man. But I watched her when she got home bathing him, and I thought, I mean, I'd bath small babies of my own, but he was tiny. And I was looking at her and I thought, like, you're only 18, you're only a child yourself, and she just managed it so well, so, you know, perfectly. This wee tiny, tiny baby. And she adored him.
So at what point did you realise then she had relapsed?
It was the day of the christening, the baby's christening. He wasn't christened, he was a few months old because of the COVID situation too. Everything was at a standstill. And That night, I was minding them as they were going out to celebrate the Christmas, so I was keeping the baby. And later on that night, I got a phone call to say that she'd run on the child's father. And it just went in a downhill spiral.
And what sort of things can you identify as a mother, you know, when you're seeing your child? You talked about the weight loss.
Yeah.
Is there other things about her that you realise that she's taking something?
Agitation.
There's obviously a change in her personality.
Big change in her personality. So irritable, so, sharp with people, so, quick to lose her temper. Not eating regularly.
Was she going out and leaving you with the...
For a time, yes, she was going out and leaving me with the baby quite often. And, I pulled her more than once and says, this is your child. You chose to get pregnant. You chose to give birth. He's your responsibility. But her whole personality just changed, and I could see the pattern starting all over again after the few weeks after the christening.
So she's living for the day at this point. She's not sort of making plans into the next day or the next day. She's just living for the drugs.
She was living for... I don't even know if she was living for the drugs. She had this idea, a perfect family in her head. Her son and her son's father, which was never going to happen. And at 18, she believed she was going to have the rosy, garden and the picket fence. And I mean, we've been a lot older and a lot wiser and been there and wore the T-shirt. And the drugs came back on site. And she still maintained it was only grass. We had argument after argument. And the guilt I carry now, since I lost her, is immense, because from her childhood, I have a lot of happy memories. But maybe the last year and a half of her life, it was a constant battle against drugs. And actually, a couple of weeks before she lost her life, she actually told one of her close friends,
It's okay,
that if she didn't stop, she was going to end up in prison or dead.
She knew that herself. So she's obviously moved out at this point. She's not living with you.
No, she moved in the supported accommodation on the waterside. And then she went down to Asha. The COVID was still there, so she had to designate one visitor a week to come and see her, because that's all they allowed in at the time. So I went up every Tuesday. She had a list when I went in to see her of everybody's shopping list. So I was leaving Asha premises and heading in the Oma town to get a list of stuff for all the patients in Asha, taking it out. But she loved seeing me, and it was quite hard for her when she was doing the 4 weeks up there. A few times she was going, "No, Mommy, I'm not doing this. I'm coming home, with somebody in order." And it wasn't that somebody in order, it was the come down of the drugs. And her personality was, everything was sort of hitting her, annoying her, and which I'd seen multiple times before when she hadn't got the drugs, how her personality changed. And I talked her around many's the night that she wanted to leave, and thank God she finished the 4 weeks stay. And she came out and she was amazing when she got out. It was, my daughter was back.
Mm-hmm. And what age was she then?
19.
Right. So you had hope that you had her back and she was going to stay off the drugs.
Yep. And then she's done well for a long time after that. I mean, the photographs I have in the house she was never heavy. But, you know, she just looked healthy when she got off everything.
Mm.
And she's stunning girl. And she's seen good in everybody. She had such a big heart. She would have took a shirt off her back for you. Like, I remember her coming in the car with me up to my sister's house. And my sister was going somewhere and she opened the front, the car door and held it open for my sister to get in. And I went, 3 weeks ago, when she was on the drugs, she'd hit you with that door, she wouldn't opened it for you. And that was a reality.
Mm.
You know, because what I noticed about Jasmine, and I know other young people now that suffer from addiction, they become very, very selfish. It's all about them. They don't focus on nobody or nothing, just them. But when Jasmine was Jasmine, everybody and everything came in front of her. She put herself absolutely last.
So it was like the drugs took all the good out of her.
Yeah, for definite. The drugs took her whole demeanour, her whole personality, the whole good out of her. Mm. And it was just looking and, just praying that we would get the same person back.
Mm. So that lasted some time, but unfortunately,
she relapsed
again.
Yeah. She still insisted it was just grass. I sort of had an idea it was more than grass, but she would never admit it to me. And then the November 22, she started coming back to Woodley. Drugs and alcohol.
That's a service centre, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, drugs and alcohol. And we get down that day and she says, do you want to come in with me? And I says, do you want me to come in? And she says, aye, please, Mommy. And we went in and she opened up and revealed that she was on opioids.
Right.
I nearly fell off the chair because I didn't even know what an opioid was. I mean, I wasn't sure what grass is. I always heard of people smoking dope and smoking pot and smoking grass, but, I didn't know much about it. But when she told the counsellor that she was on opiates, it just gobsmacked me.
Mm.
And the counsellor started telling me then about opioids, and the counsellor actually asked me that day. We sat and had a long discussion, and the counsellor says to me, rather than Jasmine continuing to take opioids until I get her an appointment with the doctor that's on site out there, would you allow her to smoke her grass at home?
Mm.
I hated drugs all my life. I knew nothing about drugs. I was always feared of drugs, and I was sort of reluctant going on. And then I thought, well, grass is a bit better than opioids, because the counsellor explained it all to me, and I thought, well, opioids can kill her. Grass probably won't. I thought, right, okay, but I made it clear, just until we get her and to see the doctor, because they were speaking about some injection that they were going to prescribe once a month.
It's instead of a methadone or whatever. It's
something along them lines. I can't remember the name of the injection now, but She had to wait anyway to get an appointment with the doctor that was on site out there. She came home. I was still very iffy about grass, being near me because I just don't like drugs, never liked drugs. But the only place in the house I would smoke cigarettes is the kitchen. And Jasmine knew that. All my children know that. So she used to come down the stairs and say, if I was in the sitting room, Mum, I'm going out the back. And that was to let me know that she was going out to smoke it, so I wouldn't come to the kitchen because she knew it would annoy me and upset me and leave me in bad form. So we kept going back to the drugs and alcohol team, and she kept taking me into the meetings, and she was maintaining just the grass for a few weeks. And then she breached her bail. Jasmine was out in court bail.
What was she up in court for?
She was the July previous. There was a group of them out. And now this case is finished with, so we can speak about it. On her 21st birthday, it was the 5th of July, and she'd left the day previous and went, and she never came back that night, and I was ringing and ringing till 4 in the morning. Of course, didn't get her. And she landed. I actually said, she phoned me the next day, and I says, where are you? I'll be up shortly for my birthday presents. As if not a care in the world. And I actually seen her along with a fella that I know and didn't want her to associate with him. Not the child's fella, another fella. And I thought, no, here we go. This is definitely a drug scene again. So I got back to the house. She landed in, and that was the 5th of July. She got her birthday presents. We had an argument over the fella I seen her with. And I says, why are you alone with dirt like that? Where's this going to get you? So a row erupted, and I left the house because I didn't want it to escalate any further. I drove down the street, and the same fella that we had the row, we was standing at the bottom of the street waiting on her. Now, and that was on the 5th of July. On the 7th of July, Jasmine was arrested along with 3 or 4 other people that apparently they kidnapped this fella that was standing at the end of my street on the 4th of July and held him hostage to the 7th.
Right.
Yet no, he was standing at the bottom of my street in the 5th. Now, these kids was dropped, but Jasmine was put in court bail for this and put in a tag, a curfew.
Mm-hmm.
Jasmine just couldn't abide by this curfew. She just couldn't. She breached her bail. I mean, I think it was 13 times before they actually sent her to prison. But it was all for breaking the curfew.
Mm.
So they sent her to High Bank, and she spent 3 weeks in it. She got released in High Court bail. She got out. But then we would lay in that we were out all over Christmas and January. She breached her bail again. And they sent her. She breached her bail and they took her to court. She was took to court on the Monday for the breach of the curfew again. On the Monday, she had an appointment arranged for the Tuesday to see the doctor on site at Woodley. But the judge refused her bail and sent her back up, even though she had the appointment to get this injection. This injection was the... it
was like a replacement sort of a thing.
Yeah. For to get her... That she would never get a buzz, as they call it, or an opioid.
Okay.
So the judge ultimately remanded her on the Monday, so she missed the appointment Tuesday. She got released in High Court bail on Friday and came home. I picked her up at the bus depot 7:10 in the town because her bail hearing was on Thursday after 1. I was on side, like, from the solicitor's office. Brought her home on the Friday night. She never left the house. She went up to town on the Saturday and took my grandson with, not her own child, but my other daughter's son up to town. Took him to McDonald's, bought herself some clothes, bought her own son some clothes. Came back. Never left the house on Saturday night either. Sunday, she went out for maybe half an hour. And I thought she's away to get grass. Came back. The Monday she went out and she came back, and then she's got more than grass on her. And I confronted her. No. And there was actually no point arguing with somebody that wasn't sober enough to argue back. I said, just go to your bed. Tuesday she got up, went out early. She had to be in for 12 at night, and she couldn't leave till 7 in the morning with the curfew, the bail curfew. But she went out, I think it was about 10 on the Tuesday morning. And didn't come back to, I was ringing her from 11 on. You make sure you're home here for 12. You have to be in for 12. So she came home. The Wednesday morning, I was lying on the sofa and she came in to get the front door keys, because my front door keys was on the car keys. They opened the front door, and it was, what time? It was early, really early that morning. I says, where are you going? She says, out. I says, at this time of morning. And she went, but sure, look, I'm in a routine getting up early. And that was just to try and bluff me, sidetrack me, whatever. And I went, right, okay. I says, I'm sick of this, Jasmine. I'm so sick of this. So away she went. And I was sitting that day, and she phoned me a messenger at about 3 o'clock, and she says, Mommy, we had a meeting to attend the next day. And she was giving off a bit on the phone about certain things, and I says, look, calm yourself down. But I knew by listening there, she'd something on her. I just didn't know what. And I says, calm yourself down. Right, Mum. I says, right, I'll talk to you. You make sure you're home here before 12. Right, love you, Mum. I says, right, love you. And that was the end of the conversation. That night, at about 10 past 11 o'clock, I started ringing her. No answer. Started texting her. You better get home. You're nothing but a cunt. I'll be honest. Look, I mean,
You're at your wit's end with her.
You're going to bring cops back to my door tonight again. I'm sick of this. When are you going to put, put us, this isn't about you. This is about, the message just was. My sister phoned me anyway, 20 past 12 came. She still wasn't back, and I was so angry. I thought, here we go tonight again. This is we girl ever going to bloody learn, But about 20 past 12, my sister rang me. She was up at her friend's house down the street from me and asked me for a lift home. Sent down, got her, left her out home. The Hazelbank came back, and when I pulled in the street, there was a police car sitting outside my house, and I thought, right, here we go. So I got out, and 2 police officers got out. They says, G4S contacted us, Jasmine breached her bail curfew. And I went right, and I opened the front door and walked in. 2 of them walked in the hall behind me, and I turned around and I says, I didn't invite you, son, here, stand outside. Oh, well, can you check for Jasmine? So I knew she wasn't in because I'd already left, and she wasn't in before I left. So I walked up the stairs, checked her room, came back down. I said, no, she's not here. Well, you have to ring us when she returns. And I went, right, okay. It's like, I said, well, I'm going to ring the police and get my own daughter arrested, right? So away they went. So I went in the living room and I was texting her again. Fucking police here. And never no answer. And She hadn't seen the messages, and it was ringing, there was no answer. And so next thing, I'm lying on the sofa watching the TV, and my phone rings. And it looked a strange number, and I was just getting ready to give it there. I thought that was Jasmine already, and I was just going to give the Lord's Prayer and answer it. And I went, "Hello, Miss Duddy, could you open the door? This is the police from Strand Road." So I went out and opened the door, and I looked at them, and I says, "Oh, can we come in? This is a bit sensitive." And I went, "Right." So I walked the kitchen. They followed me out the kitchen. "Do you want to sit down?" I says, "No, tell me what's going on." And they just says, "We're sorry to tell you that your daughter's been found dead and found deceased in a house in Moss Park." I just couldn't believe it. Just total shock. I don't even remember the rest of the conversation we had, to be honest with you. I was just in total, what? What the fuck are you telling me? Now, what I do know is they took me up to my daughter's house. I couldn't have drove my own car. My whole body was shaking. They took me up to my daughter's house. My oldest daughter lived in Coleraine. They actually sent police in Coleraine to go and tell her. And it was just awful. It was so unreal. We sat that morning, and I was just sitting there going, what is going on? Not even realising the whole thing that was happening around me. Then they rung and asked me would I come down and identify Jasmine's body. And my daughter Nicola says, "No, Mommy, I'll do it." She knew I wouldn't have been able to manage that. I've got a heart complaint. So she took that responsibility away from me, and she went down. She's never ever spoke about that, about what happened. She went down there, obviously she's seen her sister, but the circumstances around her identifying her, she's never ever spoke about that, and it worries me at times. Is she, thinks and that she really should be, talking about. I don't want things building up in her either, getting held.
Did you know immediately it was the drugs?
I had a fair idea. The CID told me on the phone when they rang for me to come down to identify her that there was no suspicion of foul play. So it sort of had me right. It has to be drugs. But then text messages and voicemails that was sent to a family member and got shared with me were, if she hadn't done this or if she hadn't done that, she'd still be alive. I mean, the CID didn't take none of this serious or to investigate none of this. They put it down to a drug death, and there isn't even a family liaison officer from the police for a drug related
Was this a strange place where she was? Did you know this house?
I have never heard of this fella's house this person's house she was in.
Yeah.
And I never heard his name before. I couldn't get why she was in Galia, because I didn't know who this person was. So why would she be found dead in his house? Who was he? What was he?
And I suppose in a way, Ciaran, to set the scene of what is going on in the sort of the drug market at this time, this is February 2023. So this is probably what we're talking about, polydrug use, people who are using lots of different substances, who'll buy on the streets and take whatever. They're not careful drug users.
Mm.
So something is sort of going on at this time, isn't there?
Mm. Well, I think the problem of prescription drugs being sold on the black market was and is a common problem, not just here locally in Derry, but throughout Ireland. But what brought this kind of into focus was a few months after Jasmine's death. It was actually a court case in Derry. It was a woman was accused of supplying drugs, and during the evidence being put forward actually for I think it was a bail application, police said that the drugs that this woman had been allegedly found with, there were some drugs missing from that batch, and that the police had linked 3 deaths just within a few days before to this so-called bad batch of drugs. And as well as the 3 deaths, there had been 5 incidents where young people had taken cardiac arrests. So the fact that this was said in open court obviously got a lot of publicity and brought it out into a wider audience. As I said, Jasmine had died just a few months before, but had kind of that story hadn't really come out. And I think that obviously brought it on the public domain. A few days after, one of the young people that had died, their mother spoke to Sunday World about their own story. He was Sean Paul Boyle. He was 28, also from Derry. He was the youngest of, there was 4 siblings in his family. He had 2 young daughters. He, his mother Rosemary spoke to us and said that he had, similar to Jasmine, he had battled an addiction from when he was a young teenager. I think it was young as 14. And he, again, like Jasmine, he had beat the addiction at times, but then relapsed, and it was a constant, just a similar story to what Pauline has said there. And his mother, Rosemary, actually said that even when he was alive, she was grieving because she knew she was going to get the knock on the door some night. And that knock came, it was August the 12th last year. That knock on the door came to Rosemary's. The police arrived at her door and told her son had been found unconscious and at a house and subsequently died. And actually on that same night, just a few miles up the road in Strabane, young girl, Andrea Logue, she was 20. She was also found unconscious and subsequently died in hospital. So those were 2 of the cases that the police had spoke about in that court case. So there was obviously a lot of attention brought to the subject then, which focused in the northwest area where this bad batch of drugs had been identified, and the Public Health Agency in the north put out an appeal. Pauline then, her story then became more in the focus too, and obviously you had this trail of tragedy of young people who had died from prescription drugs being sold on the black market and laced with contaminants. And I think the case, what happened was that the drugs led to cardiac arrest in the young people. So in some cases you had incidents where young people were dying of heart attacks, and that would be what their cause of death is in terms of coroners. But we know that it was the drugs, was the story behind this. So we had the situation last summer, really, where there was a real focus on the northwest. And I know, just anecdotally speaking to people, that these drugs had sort of crossed the border into Donegal as well, and that there was incidents there. So there's a real kind of public focus on this area. But as I said, it's obviously clearly
it's a nationwide thing and could happen anywhere. Problem. So the opioids we traditionally recall, I suppose, particularly in Dublin, the 80s and the 90s, opioids were heroin and people injected it or they smoked it. But nowadays, these people who take opioids can buy pills.
I think that the main drugs, as far as we were aware here, is pregabalin.
Pregabalin,
which is a prescription drug. It's used to treat epilepsy and nerve damage and different conditions. but that it's a very powerful drug, and it's warning that it can be addictive.
So does it have a similar effect? You know, the effect of it is obviously to suppress the system and to...
If used properly,
Yeah.
you know, if used obviously through prescription, it's a powerful drug, and it does its job.
A perfectly good drug, yeah.
But as often happens with these opioids, it can be easily abused, and they become commodity on the black market, and that's what happened in this case, and is happening. And then you have the situation where they can be bought very cheaply, but a lot of the drugs are laced with more dangerous substance. So you're taking that concoction, that mixture, and it's just, you know, it's a deadly combination.
And was it a case? Did you learn? Was it a case that Jasmine took too much of particular tablets, or did you ever discover where she'd got them? Or
the death certificate, we got we got an emergency death cert saying uncertain on it, cause of death uncertain, because we were waiting toxicology reports come back, and then it came out that I don't know how much she took, but it was pregabalin,
right,
and bromamazole. That
again, that's another. Is it legal drug that on prescription?
I'm not sure about that one, but I know pregabalin is a prescription drug, but these ones was getting brought on off the black market.
So where are they coming from off the black market? Like, are they coming from thefts of pharmaceutical laboratories, or are they being made specifically?
I know that I've covered quite a few cases where people are breaking into houses, and the real commodity now was, maybe before it was TVs or whatever, but people go and look for drugs. You know, so that there's obviously coming through that. But I think at a higher scale, the dealers have realised the potential, so they are sourcing their drugs, whether at getting at a low level, getting people to break into houses that they know there's users live in those houses, and that. But even that's a small scale. You know, at a bigger scale, they're obviously getting their hands on these drugs. But then again, by lacing them and contaminating them, they're spreading their product further and getting more. I
mean, there has been incidents that certain dealers have flown Chinese chemists into the country to teach them how to create these substances, and clearly, younger users are more likely to take the tablets than they are to go back to the old ways of injecting, and you know, that's still seen as
and there's such a growing market for it. I remember last year there's a guy who is involved in helping people recover from addictions. He himself was a former drug addict, and he was telling me, which I thought was very, you know, enlightening, that a few years ago, like, drugs weren't an issue in the homeless community. You know, alcohol was. He said, but now it's all about drugs, because they're so cheap, they're so easily available, and particularly among young people, it says you can buy a batch of drugs for less than a bottle of wine. You know, so it's that market is huge for them, and it's obviously being supplied from sources that have all, as you said, maybe traditionally would have looked at other drugs, but now this seems a cheaper way into the market, clearly a profitable market and a growing market. As I said, the focus was on here in recent times because going back to that court case, where often the police wouldn't maybe highlight this. Well, not that they wouldn't highlight it, but it was just so clearly brought under focus through the court case that it just attracted attention.
The amount of young people that had died from
yeah,
shocking.
And then the fact that Pauline and other families came forward and spoke about their own tragedy kept the focus on. And often from a media point of view, that, you know, you have these tragic stories and issues, but then the focus maybe moves on to different, stories as happens, but through the family, and I would say particularly Pauline's campaign, that she doesn't want, what she can say, she can obviously speak for herself, but I think it's a case of she doesn't want Jasmine's death to be in vain. So she is now, pushing for this campaign in terms of getting stronger sentences for drug dealers and just raising awareness of this massive problem.
Because, Pauline, that tablet taking thing makes it even more difficult for a parent to know if the child is taking or the teenager is taking something as serious as that.
Yeah.
There's no smell. There's no, kit that goes with it.
Yeah.
In the olden days, there would have been needles and stuff like that could have been found, and track marks on arms and all the rest of it. So
you're walking blind.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know. I mean, Jasmine was coming in and her eyes was a bit bloodshot, but I thought it was still the grass. I mean, she was sleeping a bit longer. But nothing major. So, no, I had no idea that that she was using tablets that were so dangerous and that could take her life, and did take her life.
And can you talk about those first few weeks and the funeral? You must have remained in complete shock and trauma.
I remember the undertaker coming into my kitchen and putting out a book, coffins, to pick a coffin. Oh, what? I just started squilling. I thought, and my daughter was still lying in the house that she died in by this stage, because they didn't remove Jasmine till 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the next day. So it was over 12 hours since she died, and she was still in this house. And they didn't remove her to take her for post-mortem. And I remember putting down the photographs of the coffins for us to pick one. I started squilling. My two oldest daughters just turned and says, "No, we want a white coffin," because she was our baby. And that's what they put, a white coffin, because she was the baby. And the morning of the funeral, the night before the funeral, there was, thank God, all the young people. There was only 2 people that came to my house with substances in them. They all showed, real strength, because I didn't want anybody near my home with drugs on them. 2 people did come with substances in them. One caused a bit of a scene, which was awful. There was another one there that actually contacted the fellow that introduced Jasmine to the drugs. They gave him the link for the funeral mass in the Craig Chapel the next morning. When I was made aware of this at 6 o'clock in the morning, I just fell apart and says, no, I wasn't allowing Jasmine to be removed from the house, because this man introduced her to drugs, and he's not going to be sitting watching her funeral mass. So my 2 daughters was in a whole tizzy, because they knew once I says that I wasn't letting her out, that was, that's what was happening. So they contacted the undertaker, contacted the priest in the Craig Chapel, and we got the video link turned off. The weeks after, it was just like living in limbo, not knowing what was going on. Walking around and looking, when everybody else going on with their normal daily routine, and I was stuck in this one place. I had just buried my child, my youngest child, and I couldn't understand how people could continue with their normal routines when I was stuck. It was sleepless nights. It was crying at a drop of a hat. Agitation on my part because I couldn't understand what was going on around me. You know, people was wishing well, but I wanted to be left alone. And it was just like I was getting overcrowded with everybody, and I just wanted to swirl out of me. Because my oldest daughter actually moved back in because when Jasmine died, because she moved back in home from Coleraine because they didn't want to leave me in my own.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just horrendous, and it still is horrendous every day. Waking up, and she's the first thought that comes into my head when I open my eyes, and she's my last thought at night. And all day, every day. I mean, I've just focused my life from last August on this campaign to try and stop any other family going through what me and so many other mothers all around Ireland have went through, having to bury one of their own children.
You talked about you felt guilt earlier, I think, when you were saying that it hadn't been easy, I suppose, before she died. You couldn't have behaved in any other way together, though, when she's on drugs and you're trying to pull her back from that.
See, I tried to softly approach. Tried the blackmail approach. I tried every approach I could possibly think of, and then the anger approach came out. And it was just a constant battle. And now I've made great friends with a girl and her daughter's suffering with addiction. And she's actually in the anger approach now too. And it's just like watching me 2 years ago. But never did I believe when I was arguing with Jasmine, and arguing where, I carry guilt for that because I never ever thought she would have died on me. But I would have tried any strategy, anything I possibly could to try and get her clean.
Well, I think not everyone has a parent like that, and you don't seem to have ever left her side or not been there for her.
No, she was just... Jasmine was so special because there was an 8-year gap between her and her brother, her older sons. And I mean, I nearly lost her when I was carrying her. So when I went, went full term and then delivered her, I mean, she was just the wee icing on the cake for me. And she was just always the spoiled wee baby in the house, and she got what she wanted, and she knew what buttons to press on everybody and wrap everybody around her wee finger. But she was more than loved by everybody. She got everything she wanted, everything she needed, all the love in the world she had with her own family. She couldn't ask for any more love, and it was just a lot of guilt around the last few months before she died, arguing. We were constantly over drugs, but it was the only approach left because I tried every other approach with her.
So you talk about that August, so that's not that far on in your grief.
No.
You somehow find yourself able to turn your grief into a campaign for others.
It wasn't even turned a grief into something else. It was just, I could feel my mental health slipping. And I thought, I need to get something to occupy my mind. Not to take Jasmine out of my mind. To try and focus on something to keep my head above water. And I thought, something good has to come out of something so awful. if there's any good that can come out of it. I mean, not for my family. But I thought, no, why if I can do something to stop something, all or more feeling the way I'm feeling, this is worth a shot. So I was just sitting one night, and to be honest, I had no idea what I was doing.
Mm.
And I went online and how do you start a campaign? And that night, I'll be totally frank and honest, I thought it was just a matter of putting a campaign up online and that was it. Sit back and do nothing else. But was I wrong? Because it was all right putting the campaign online. I didn't realise that you had to go and battle and batter doors and keep battering doors and keep shouting and sending emails and making phone calls and writing letters. And it gave me a whole lot to focus on.
Mm.
But the lack of support is so sad. Because we're nearly 10 months on it, and there's just over 4,000 signatures online. And this is a major, major problem in this island and everywhere else in the world. Specific, we're talking about this. We're fighting for this island. We've over 2,000 on paper.
What are you hoping to get to?
Well,
sky's the limit. As many
whatever,
as you can.
as many as we can. But I mean, I'm halfway there about where I wanted to be at. We wanted to get there. We've met with the Sentencing Council in Stormont.
And what's that?
That's the judiciary. And we've met with them and we had a very, very long conversation. Me and another lady in the city have came together.
Mm.
Her daughter's fighting addiction. She's fighting to keep her daughter alive. I'm fighting for everybody else's children, including this lady's child. I believe if there's enough of a deterrent put in place, drug dealers won't. If the legislation stands at the minute, it's 14 years. There's not one judge enforcing this. And I believe if a judge starts handing out 14 years imprisonment for anybody supplying drugs, they're going to sit and have a think about it instead of the wee 2 years slapping the wrist that they're getting at the minute. Because if they do remand, 1 day classes is 2 days. So by the time they get in the court and get sentenced, most of them have their time served.
And you seen that in the courts, Ciaran?
It would be. You would generally see that the 14 years that Pauline refers to is the maximum in the rest of the UK. I don't think it's that level here. And even at that I've never seen anyone get the maximum sentence in terms of drugs. So there is an element, obviously, with the families of victims that they feel that the sentences aren't enough of a deterrent. Mm-hmm. So there's that debate, and that debate's been going on for a long time, that the sense that dealers, people that are convicted of drug dealing convictions, are getting off lighter here than they maybe would be in other parts of the UK. So there is that. There's definitely a perception that there needs to be tougher sentencing. And
the story itself and the loss of Jasmine's life is a very powerful message, isn't it?
Yeah, but I mean, it's so easy to get hooked up in addiction. It's so hard to get out of. And the services that are in place are not adequate. I mean, when we went to meet with the Sentencing Council in Stormont, I got a debit printed off that the government had a debit in 2021. And at that stage, they were saying that that the services in place weren't working. And the mainland Britain, they're handing out 3 to 4 times the sentences than they're imposing here for the same crime. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're not second-class citizens, and our children, need to be protected. Because what's happening is these boys is going up, getting a very light sentence, coming out and reoffending straight away again. And
I
even
think they're just seen as sort of street dealers.
yeah, but I mean, no, I know that it's difficult to prove that a certain drug killed a certain individual, but being concerned to supply a drug that took somebody's life, there has to be a higher charge than that. But this is what we're at. This is what's getting handed out. Concerned to supply, yet no, a young person has died.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if it's my child or the next child. I mean, you sit back as a mother. I've went up to a Crown Court and sat and watched sentencing. And I know the defence barristers is doing a job that they're getting paid for. But they make these perpetrators out as if they're the victims. And I'm sitting in the court biting my tongue thinking, how many young people has lost their life over the last few years that I'm aware of? I mean, I've got stats sent out to me and read up on it, and it's just horrendous. And these defence barristers is making them out as the victims to get them their sentence even later.
Mm-hmm. Very hard to hear.
It's sickening. And then when I started this campaign, I've went round every politician in the city from both sides.
Mm.
And yep, they all stood up to get photographs took for newspapers. And they were like hide and seek champions, nowhere to be seen, nowhere to be found. Not one of them mentioning the drug deaths, not one of them. We voted these people in. They work for us. And there's not one mention of the drug problem in the city or any other city in the north. I don't get it. Like a few months ago, £12 million was issued for a new museum in Derry. We don't need a new museum. We have a museum. Okay, it might bring tourist attraction or whatever. But who wants to visit a town when there's young people staggering all over the place that can't get help with addiction?
I think every city's like that.
Yeah, but that £12 million would have been better to go to a detox centre or adequate services for people suffering. They get immediate help and support.
What do you think about the drug problem here and, I suppose, in the Northwest?
I don't think, as you said, it's any worse than anywhere else in Ireland. And I think Pauline's story will resonate with so many families, so many families throughout Ireland that have lost a loved one to drugs. So don't think, obviously, her story, Jasmine's story has brought a focus on, and as we spoke about earlier, about the spate of deaths locally last year, obviously brought a focus on it, but I don't think this is a problem across the country, across the world, in many ways that it's, but I think what Pauline and other people here have done, by speaking about it and by highlighting their own personal story, it brings it into focus. So often we can just, from a media's point of view, we're skilled in it about reporting on issues and then moving on to the next story, and it, and not maybe seeing as much about the tragedy behind that story. Through Pauline's campaign and many other families that have spoken about their own heartbreak, it brings that story and it keeps the focus on the story, and the hope that some good will come of that situation. But it can be difficult. As I'm saying, I don't think the issue is any different here than so many other cities, and not even just cities now, as we know, towns, villages.
This is it, because
drugs are everywhere.
They're everywhere, and you have the problem that the availability of them, the increased availability, it's much easier for people to take them. They don't have to leave their armchairs at home if they want to just
Yeah.
phone up. And so it's difficult to know if any solution is there, or, you know, but I do think that going behind the statistics and hearing the story of a real human being and the tragedy, I do believe that has to make a difference to some people. People you probably will never know will listen to the story, and maybe they won't go and take those things or go down that path or think twice or whatever happens. But I think, you know, being brave enough and being able to talk about it will make a huge difference.
Well, that's what this campaign is about. If speaking out about Jasmine saves one person, then it's worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all I want for young people, to be healthy and happy and drug-free.
So, Pauline, where can people find the campaign and where can they sign the petition?
It's online on Facebook. It's on TikTok. The link is in both Facebook and TikTok.
Mm-hmm.
And I have paper sheets at home.
Yeah.
I did put them in the shops, but when I went back to lift them, they were sort of lost, so I don't put them in the shops anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But I've met with the public health twice. I've met with the senior police twice. I'm not really happy about the response I got, but we're now waiting on a meeting. I did coming out to meet with the Justice Minister herself in Stormont.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that the district judge in Derry is looking at sentencing in a different light now at the minute because of the drug issue in the city. So hopefully,
you're going to make a difference.
I hope so. If it just keeps one young person alive, then.
Well, Pauline, thank you very much.
Thank you.
If you would like to sign Pauline's petition, you can do so at her Stop the Street Drugs campaign. Find links on her Pauline Duddy Facebook site or on TikTok at pauline.duddy. I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.